Asterisk. The distant stars flickered like diamonds scattered across an inky void. In the heart of this cosmic ocean, humanity had long been content to remain hidden, a species of weak, fragile beings scattered across their pale blue dot, Earth. The galaxy was ruled by far older, far mightier civilizations, an assortment of alien races that saw humans as nothing more than a curious footnote in the larger story of the universe. For eons, humanity was relegated to the role of prey. It was a simple truth: humans were easy targets. They were small, soft, and lacked the raw physical strength or advanced technology of their galactic neighbors. However, there was one thing that had set humans apart: their capacity for adaptation and innovation. At first, the rise of humanity on Earth had seemed like an accident of evolution, a species that was clever but not particularly strong. But as time passed, humans did what they had always done best: they learned. They grew from their mistakes, crafted tools, and began to bend the world around them to their will. Yet, even as they conquered their world, the stars beyond remained as alien as ever. Humanity had never set foot on them. That was until the arrival of the Xerok. The Xerok were a monstrous species, towering, reptilian creatures, each one standing at least 15 feet tall. They were known for their advanced technology, their merciless nature, and their vast empire that spanned multiple star systems. They were not interested in peaceful coexistence; their only goal was expansion. They were hunters at the top of the food chain, and they had set their sights on Earth. When the first wave of Xerok warships entered Earth's atmosphere, humanity had no choice but to cower. The Xerok saw the planet's natural resources as the key to their expansion, and Earth's fragile defenses were no match for their overwhelming power. The first cities fell in flames, and within weeks, entire nations had crumbled under the heel of the alien invaders. Humanity was powerless to resist. But what the Xerok had underestimated was something they could never have predicted: humanity's unyielding will to survive. Despite the devastation, humans fought back in the only way they knew how. They adapted. The survivors, those who had escaped the initial onslaught, began to form pockets of resistance. The war was desperate, but humanity's ingenuity began to shine through. Scientists and engineers, working with limited resources, found ways to weaponize Earth's technology. Humanity's first crude anti-Xerok weapons were created. They weren't much, but they were enough to bring the fight to the aliens. Resistance cells multiplied across the planet. At first, it was little more than guerrilla warfare. Humans knew they couldn't match the Xerok in sheer strength, but they began to exploit the aliens' overconfidence. Xerok patrols, once invincible in their arrogance, were ambushed in dense forests, or caught in the ruins of destroyed cities. Small teams of human fighters, armed with makeshift explosives and high-tech sabotage tools, harried the Xerok at every turn. They learned the aliens' tactics and exploited their weaknesses. But what truly set the resistance apart was their ability to learn faster than the Xerok had ever anticipated. Every battle, every encounter with the invaders, taught humanity more about the alien enemy. Slowly but surely, the balance of power began to shift. The Xerok, for the first time in their history, began to experience defeat. Yet, this was only the beginning. The war was a battle for survival, but it was also something more, a test of humanity's ability to evolve in the face of extinction. With each victory, the resistance began to grow bolder. Humans developed new technologies, reverse engineering the Xerok's own weapons to use against them. They constructed battle suits and weapons far more advanced than anything they had ever known. In hidden laboratories beneath the ground, humanity began to unlock the secrets of the alien technology that had been left behind in their wake. This would be the turning point. The human race had always been a species of survivors, of pioneers. But now, something else was emerging. The humans weren't just fighting to stay alive, they were fighting to reclaim their place in the universe. The era of prey was coming to an end. And soon, the predators would be the ones hunted. In a dark, quiet lab beneath the ruins of a fallen city, Dr. Elena Soren, one of the brightest minds among the human resistance, worked tirelessly on a project that would change everything. She had unlocked a piece of Xerok technology, something that could rewrite the future of humanity. But it wasn't just about weapons. This was a transformation. A new era was dawning. Humanity's evolution had begun. The war had raged for years now. Earth, once a thriving hub of human civilization, had become a war-torn battlefield. Skyscrapers lay shattered, forests turned to ashes, and the skies had taken on an ominous, permanent haze from the constant bombardment. Yet, within the chaos, a new hope began to emerge, a spark of something far greater than mere survival. Dr. Elena Soren's breakthrough had been monumental. The technology she had uncovered from the Xerox ships was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, and it wasn't just advanced weaponry. Among the wreckage of the enemy's ships was a discovery that would change the course of the war, a device capable of amplifying the human genome. This technology, initially designed by the Xerox to enhance their own physical abilities, had been designed for the purpose of creating superior warriors, beasts of battle capable of enduring far more than any ordinary species. But Dr. Soren had seen its potential, not to create a weapon, but to unlock the hidden potential of humanity itself. The process was risky, with no guarantee of success. But humanity had nothing left to lose. They were on the brink of extinction. If the human race had any hope of surviving, let alone winning, they would need to evolve, quickly. The first test subjects were soldiers. Volunteers from the ranks of the resistance, warriors who had fought in the trenches for years, desperate for an edge over the superior Xerox forces. They underwent the procedure, which involved injecting a complex sequence of alien serums into their bodies, genetically altering them at a cellular level. The results were almost immediate. At first, it was subtle. The soldiers felt stronger, faster, more resilient. They healed from wounds almost instantly, their endurance unmatched. The enhancement didn't just stop at physicality, it also sharpened their minds. They became more strategic, more attuned to the battlefield. The subtle changes quickly became apparent to the rest of the resistance. But the real breakthrough came when one of the soldiers, Lieutenant Nora Kane, demonstrated an ability that stunned everyone. She could manipulate the surrounding environment, subtly controlling the magnetic fields around her. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen. At first, it was a simple force, a small magnetic pulse that could push objects or disable alien tech. But as her training progressed, so too did her newfound abilities. She could manipulate the earth beneath her feet, lift immense weights, and even disrupt Xerox weaponry at a distance. As Nora's powers grew, the first wave of humanity's evolved soldiers was born. They were no longer just human, they had transcended their former limits, evolving into something new, something far more dangerous. They were becoming predators. The first few skirmishes after the enhancement were revealing. The resistance, now equipped with this new breed of soldiers, began to turn the tide of the war. The Xerox, who had once ruled the battlefield with ease, now faced a formidable foe. In a battle on the ruined streets of New York City, Nora Kane led her enhanced squad against a squadron of Xerox enforcers. What had once been a one-sided slaughter turned into a brutal, fast-paced conflict. The humans moved with terrifying speed and coordination, their new abilities giving them an edge the aliens simply couldn't match. It wasn't just their physical prowess that made them dangerous, though. They were starting to outthink the Xerox. Human tactics, once primitive and predictable, had become highly sophisticated. The enhanced soldiers were not only able to engage in hand-to-hand combat with alien warriors but also to outsmart them. The Xerox reliance on brute strength and their overwhelming firepower had made them predictable, and humans were exploiting this weakness. The news of these enhanced soldiers spread like wildfire. Soon, more volunteers came forward, eager to join the ranks of humanity's new elite forces. But there was an undercurrent of fear as well. The procedure was not without risks. Some soldiers didn't survive the transformation. Others emerged from the process as unrecognizable monsters, their minds lost to the sheer intensity of the genetic enhancements. Despite these setbacks, humanity's evolution continued at an accelerated pace. As more soldiers were enhanced, the Resistance's tactics grew ever bolder. They struck deep into Xerox strongholds, pushing back against the invaders with an intensity that left the aliens reeling. However, as their victories mounted, the Xerox leadership began to take notice. They had underestimated the humans for far too long. The tables had turned, but this new human force was not just a nuisance. They were becoming a true threat to the Xerox Empire. In the command center of the Xerox fleet, Grand General Korath, the ruthless leader of the Xerox forces, stood before a holographic display of Earth. His golden eyes glowed with fury as he surveyed the ever-growing pockets of human resistance. The humans had evolved too quickly, and now they were not just defending their planet, they were hunting down the Xerox like prey. The humans have learned to adapt. They are no longer weak. They are predators now, Korath growled. We will show them what it truly means to be hunted. In a hidden facility deep within the Resistance's headquarters, Dr. Elena Soren stared at a new blueprint she had just received from the front lines. The technology was improving faster than she had ever imagined, but there were still many unknowns about the potential consequences of these genetic alterations. She knew the war was far from over, but one thing was certain: humanity had awakened. And the galaxy would soon know that the age of humanity as prey was over. The rise of humanity's enhanced soldiers had reshaped the war entirely. What had once been an unbalanced, hopeless struggle was now a relentless counteroffensive. Cities that had fallen to Xerox dominance were slowly being reclaimed, one battle at a time. But as the human resistance grew stronger, so did the threats they faced. The Xerox had always been fierce, but now, they were driven by fear. Fear of what humanity was becoming. Dr. Elena Soren had never imagined that her discovery would lead to such rapid evolution. The soldiers who underwent the genetic enhancements now exhibited powers that were terrifying in their scope. Yet, even in the face of their growing might, the reality was clear: the enhancements were only the beginning. The first sign of what was to come came when a series of transmissions from an isolated human colony, located on a barren moon of Neptune, reached the Resistance leadership. The transmission was urgent: a new form of human evolution had emerged. This time, it was not just physical strength or the ability to manipulate the environment that had changed. Something else had awakened in the human psyche. At the heart of the colony stood Marcus Graves, an experienced resistance leader whose team had been among the first to undergo the genetic procedure. Unlike the others, however, Marcus had undergone an experimental procedure designed to enhance not just his body, but his mind. The results were immediate and terrifying. Marcus could sense things that no one should have been able to sense. He could hear the thoughts of those around him, feel the subtle movements of the air, even predict the flow of combat before it happened. It was as if his mind had been opened to the very fabric of the universe. His body, already enhanced, now moved with an almost unnatural grace, but it was his mind that made him truly dangerous. When he received word that the Xerox were planning a large-scale assault on the human stronghold, he didn't just plan an attack. He became the attack. The enhanced humans were already formidable, but with Marcus's newfound abilities, they were about to take on an entirely new level of power. The assault on the Xerox fleet was nothing short of a bloodbath. Marcus, along with his enhanced soldiers, led the charge. As they infiltrated the Xerox flagship, the humans moved like shadows, silent and deadly. But it was Marcus who struck terror into the hearts of the alien invaders. With a mere thought, he disabled the flagship's defense systems, allowing his team to storm the ship with unmatched precision. The battle within the ship was brutal. Xerox warriors, once the undisputed masters of combat, found themselves overwhelmed by the humans' relentless onslaught. Marcus, his mind operating on a level the aliens couldn't fathom, anticipated every move before it happened. He could feel the pulsing presence of the Xerox commanders, and with a focused thought, he crushed their communication systems, rendering them unable to coordinate. But it wasn't enough to win just one battle. Marcus knew the war would be decided not by individual skirmishes but by who could outlast the other. He had become more than a soldier, he had become a force of nature. But even Marcus couldn't anticipate the Xerox's final gambit. Deep within their fleet's command structure, Korath, the Grand General of the Xerox, was not idle. He had been studying humanity's evolution with a growing sense of dread. The humans were changing too quickly, too radically. They had crossed a threshold that even the Xerox had not thought possible. Karatha's solution was one of desperation, but also brilliance. If humanity had found a way to evolve, then perhaps they could push them even further into that path. The Grand General began to develop a countermeasure, a biological weapon capable of mutating human cells at an accelerated rate, causing the enhanced soldiers to go mad, turning them into uncontrollable monsters. Karatha's plan, codenamed the Reversion, was set into motion. The weapon was deployed in small doses, initially introduced as an innocuous biological agent, meant to infiltrate human territory undetected. The Xerox had hoped it would spread slowly, affecting the human race over time. But they underestimated the speed at which the enhanced soldiers had developed. Instead of a gradual decay, the virus interacted with the enhancements in unexpected ways, causing rapid, violent mutations in the affected humans. The first signs appeared in a small resistance outpost on the fringes of Earth's colonies. Soldiers who had undergone the enhancement procedure began to show signs of erratic behavior. Their bodies twisted and contorted unnaturally. Their minds, once sharp and strategic, began to break down. The virus amplified their aggression, turning once disciplined soldiers into feral beasts. They attacked anything in their path, unable to recognize friend from foe. Marcus Graves was among the first to realize what had happened. He had seen the signs before. The altered humans had started to lose control of their own abilities, their minds fractured by the very enhancements that had once made them the pinnacle of humanity's evolution. He understood what was happening. The Xerox had found a way to hijack humanity's evolution. But Marcus refused to let the predators become prey again. He gathered his elite team and began working furiously to find a cure. The clock was ticking. They couldn't afford to let the mutations spread any further. But as he delved deeper into the research, he realized something terrifying. The reversion virus had not just twisted the enhanced soldiers' bodies, it had awakened something primal. The infected soldiers weren't just losing control, they were evolving into something else, something more dangerous. The war had taken a dark turn. The human race, once fighting to reclaim their place in the galaxy, was now fighting against itself. It was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a fight for control over humanity's very evolution. And as Marcus stared into the face of the new horrors that had been unleashed, he knew that the final battle would not be fought on the streets or in the stars. It would be a battle for the future of the human race itself. As humanity's fight for survival against the Xerox continued, a new and insidious threat emerged from within their own ranks. The reversion virus, a weapon of the Xerox designed to destabilize humanity's rapid evolution, had begun to spread uncontrollably among the enhanced soldiers. What was meant to be a tool to turn the tide of war had become a catastrophic flaw in the very heart of the resistance. Marcus Graves, once a beacon of hope, was now faced with an unimaginable dilemma. The soldiers who had been his closest allies, those who had stood beside him in countless battles, were now transforming into something monstrous. Their bodies twisted by the virus, their minds slipping into madness. What had once been humanity's greatest asset, their enhanced strength, speed, and intellect, was now threatening to tear them apart. In a fortified underground laboratory on the outskirts of what remained of the once great city of Los Angeles, Marcus worked tirelessly with Dr. Elena Soren, who had become the last hope for finding a cure. The virus had spread rapidly, infecting entire squads of enhanced soldiers, but there were signs that it could be stopped, or at least slowed. The cure was still out of reach, but they had discovered that the virus responded to certain genetic factors, specifically the neural pathways that had been altered in the enhanced soldiers. The key was not in simply eradicating the virus, but in restabilizing the neural pathways that had been warped by the reversion. But time was running out. The infected soldiers were becoming more dangerous by the day. Their once precise movements were replaced with violent, erratic behavior. They no longer obeyed commands, only instinct, and that instinct was to hunt, to destroy. In the desolate wasteland that had once been the vibrant heart of the United States, Marcus led a daring mission to retrieve a rare alien compound that could potentially serve as the final key to the cure. It was a dangerous venture, one that would take them deep into Xerox-controlled territory. The mission was fraught with peril, but Marcus had no choice. He had to find a solution before humanity destroyed itself from within. As the team ventured deeper into the Xerox stronghold, the air grew thick with tension. Marcus's mind, still sharp from his enhancements, could feel the subtle shifts in the environment. The Xerox were aware of their presence. The enhanced humans, once formidable warriors, now struggled to maintain their composure as the virus began to take hold. Every step closer to the compound felt like a gamble, one that could change the fate of humanity. Meanwhile, back at the human stronghold, Dr. Soren continued her work with the remaining unaffected soldiers. She had created a rudimentary treatment that could temporarily stabilize the infected, but it was only a stopgap. She needed more time, more research. But with the resistance under constant threat, time was something they didn't have. In the heart of the Resistance's command center, a new order was beginning to form. As Marcus and his team battled their way through the Xerox defenses, it became clear that their greatest enemy was no longer just the Xerox, but the soldiers who had once fought alongside them. A faction within the Resistance, led by Captain Julia Reyes, had begun to form, advocating for the quarantine and even eradication of the infected soldiers. Reyes, a pragmatist and a fierce leader in her own right, saw no other option. The infected were too dangerous to be trusted, and they were spreading the virus at an alarming rate. Reyes's faction had supporters within the Resistance, many of whom had seen firsthand the horrors the infected soldiers could unleash. Some had witnessed comrades turned into bloodthirsty animals, their once loyal minds replaced by a primal, uncontrollable rage. They argued that if humanity did not take control of the virus now, there would be no future left to fight for. The argument for quarantine grew louder, and soon, it wasn't just a matter of survival, it was a matter of whether the human race could maintain its moral high ground while fighting for its future. But Marcus refused to accept that the infected soldiers were beyond saving. He had witnessed firsthand the sacrifices these men and women had made for the greater good. They had been warriors, defenders of humanity, and he could not allow them to be cast aside so easily. The line between predator and prey was becoming blurred, and Marcus was determined to ensure that humanity didn't lose its humanity in the process. As the mission progressed, the team finally reached the Xerox facility. Inside, they found the rare alien compound, a substance that had the potential to reverse the effects of the reversion virus. But their victory was short-lived. The Xerox, aware that their experiment was at risk, had set a trap. The facility was rigged to explode, and as Marcus's team began to extract the compound, the Xerox ambushed them. The battle that ensued was nothing short of chaotic. The enhanced soldiers, still struggling to retain their sanity, fought valiantly, but they were beginning to lose control. Their movements became erratic, their enhanced abilities now turned against their own comrades. Marcus fought with all his might to keep the team together, but in the chaos, the worst happened. One of his closest allies, Lieutenant Anders, succumbed fully to the virus. In his mindless fury, Anders attacked Marcus, nearly killing him before being subdued by the remaining soldiers. It was a moment of sheer devastation. Marcus had always prided himself on his leadership, but now, as his team fractured before him, he questioned everything. The enhanced soldiers were no longer the pinnacle of human evolution, they were a broken reflection of it. With the compound in hand, Marcus and his remaining team barely escaped the facility before it was obliterated in a fiery explosion. They had lost good soldiers, friends, and comrades. But they had the cure, or at least part of it. The future of humanity now rested on the success of a single treatment. Back at the stronghold, Dr. Soren immediately began working on synthesizing the compound. But as she analyzed the data, she discovered something horrifying. The cure wasn't complete. It would stabilize the infected soldiers temporarily, but it wouldn't reverse the mutation entirely. Humanity had already crossed the threshold, there was no going back. As the virus continued to spread, it became clear that the war had changed once again. No longer were the enhanced soldiers the invincible warriors they had once been. Now, they were both humanity's greatest asset and its greatest threat. The battle for the future of humanity would not only be fought on the front lines against the Xerox, but within the hearts and minds of the very soldiers who had once been humanity's hope. Humanity was at a crossroads. As the reversion virus continued its brutal march through the ranks of humanity's enhanced soldiers, Marcus Graves and Dr. Elena Soren had become the last bastion of hope. Yet, with every step forward, they were pulled deeper into a labyrinth of impossible decisions. The cure they had discovered was a fragile lifeline, but it was clear that it was far from a perfect solution. The soldiers they had fought so hard to protect were becoming increasingly unpredictable, and the virus was evolving faster than they could keep up. In the aftermath of their harrowing mission to retrieve the alien compound, the remaining enhanced soldiers were no longer the warriors they once were. Some had lost themselves entirely, consumed by the viral mutation, while others were teetering on the edge of sanity. As the infected rampaged through human settlements, the resistance was forced to make an agonizing choice: continue to fight for the cure, or quarantine the infected and risk losing everything. Captain Julia Reyes and her faction had grown more insistent. She argued that humanity could not afford to allow the infected soldiers to roam free any longer. The outbreak was spreading across the Resistance's territories. As the virus mutated, it was creating supercharged versions of the already enhanced soldiers, creatures whose strength, speed, and aggression were so far beyond human capability that they could not be controlled. The moral and ethical concerns were being overshadowed by the sheer urgency of survival. Despite the pressure, Marcus was resolute. He could not let humanity's future slip away so easily. The war with the Xerok had been hard enough, but now humanity was fighting a battle on two fronts, against the alien invaders and the mutated shadows of its own creation. Every day, the infected soldiers grew more dangerous, and every day, Marcus watched as his comrades, those who had once been the backbone of the resistance, were consumed by their own biology. Dr. Soren, though deeply conflicted, remained Marcus's ally. She had always been a scientist at heart, believing that there was no problem that could not be solved through knowledge and perseverance. Yet the virus was unlike anything she had ever studied before. It wasn't just a disease, it was a new form of evolution, one that twisted the very foundation of humanity's genetic code. She continued to refine the cure, working tirelessly in the labs, but every test she ran came back with devastating results. The virus wasn't just mutating the infected soldiers, it was enhancing them, pushing them further along the evolutionary path. Every time they gained an advantage, it seemed the virus adapted faster. They were running out of time. Meanwhile, Captain Reyes had her own plans. With the faction calling for action, she initiated an operation to contain the infected soldiers. It wasn't just about saving humanity anymore, it was about survival at all costs. If the infected could not be cured, they would have to be neutralized. The orders were clear: quarantine any infected, but if they resisted or became violent, they were to be terminated without hesitation. The line between ally and enemy was growing dangerously thin. As Marcus and Dr. Soren worked to find a final solution, the resistance found itself divided. The stakes had escalated beyond the war for Earth, it had become a war for the soul of humanity. Would they hold on to their principles of mercy, or would they descend into the very savagery they had once fought to escape? Marcus knew that his next decision would shape the future of the human race. In the depths of a heavily fortified underground command center, Marcus sat with his most trusted allies, Lieutenant Nora Kane, who had once been the first to exhibit extraordinary powers, and Sergeant Claire Devereaux, a seasoned combatant with unwavering loyalty to the cause. They were facing an impossible choice: fight to save their comrades from the virus, or make the brutal decision to eliminate the infected soldiers before they could do more damage. "I can't believe we're even considering this," Claire said, her voice hoarse with frustration. "These soldiers, these people, we can't just turn our backs on them. They fought beside us. They're still human. We can't afford sentimentality, Claire," Marcus replied, his voice grim. "These aren't the same soldiers. They've become a threat. And the longer we wait, the more dangerous they get." Nora, who had once been the epitome of the human-enhanced soldier, strong, swift, and tactically brilliant, sat silent, her expression pained. She had always believed that humanity could overcome any challenge, that their capacity for survival and adaptation was limitless. But now, as she looked around at the walls that seemed to close in on them, she wasn't sure. She had seen firsthand what the reversion virus did to the soldiers. It took away their minds, their souls, leaving only the beast. She had fought alongside them, but she also understood that the longer they waited, the more likely humanity would be lost. Marcus, Nora spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension. There's still a chance. If we can get this cure to the front lines, we might still be able to save them. But we need to act fast. We need more time. Marcus nodded, but deep inside, he felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Time was not a luxury they had anymore. The longer they waited, the more soldiers would succumb to the virus, and the more ground they would lose in the war. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the room. A security officer rushed in, breathless and wide-eyed. "Sir, Captain Reyes has initiated a lockdown," the officer reported. "The infected are breaking out of containment. They're taking over the outposts. We need to act now." Marcus's heart sank. The line had been crossed. Without wasting a moment, he turned to his team. "Prepare for immediate deployment. We're not letting this slip away." The decision had been made. They would fight, not just for survival, but for the soul of humanity itself. There was no turning back now. As Marcus and his team rushed to the front lines, the sounds of battle echoed in the distance. Infected soldiers, once comrades, now roamed the battlefield with terrifying power, and the war against the Xerox had taken a back seat to the war within their own ranks. Marcus didn't know if they could win. But one thing was certain: humanity's struggle was no longer about defeating the Xerox. It was about defining what it meant to be human in the face of monstrous change. The battlefield was no longer a distant front against the Xerox. It had come home. Humanity's war for survival was no longer one of conquest or territorial gains, it was a desperate struggle for their very identity. Marcus Graves and his team now fought not only to reclaim the future from the claws of the alien invaders, but to reclaim the very souls of their comrades, infected by the monstrous reversion virus. But the lines had blurred. The enemy they fought had once stood beside them, their comrades, their brothers and sisters in arms, were now the very predators they had once been. The Resistance's stronghold had become a war zone in its own right. Captain Julia Reyes, intent on saving humanity from the ravages of the virus, had initiated a brutal lockdown, isolating the infected soldiers in containment zones. But the infected were no longer easily contained. Some had grown far stronger and faster than before, their bodies twisted into horrific forms. As the infected soldiers broke free from the quarantine zones, all hope of a clean resolution seemed to slip further away. Marcus had no choice but to act. His elite team, the remnants of humanity's greatest warriors, now had to fight a war against their own. The cure that Marcus and Dr. Elena Soren had developed was their last hope, but it was still untested, unproven, and the virus was evolving faster than they could track. Time had become their most precious resource, and every passing hour meant more soldiers slipping into madness and rage. The human resistance had split. Captain Reyes' faction, willing to sacrifice any infected soldier for the greater good, had gained ground. They believed that if the virus wasn't eradicated quickly, humanity itself would be doomed. Marcus, on the other hand, refused to believe that the infected could not be saved. He could see through the madness in their eyes, he knew that beneath the bloodshot fury, there was still the flicker of the soldiers they once were. And in them, he saw hope. At the command center, Marcus and Dr. Soren worked frantically. The alien compound had given them a sliver of a chance to reverse the reversion virus, but they still didn't have enough data to make the cure work. They needed more time they didn't have. "Marcus, we're running out of options," Dr. Soren said, her voice strained with exhaustion. She'd been awake for days, working tirelessly to develop the cure. If this doesn't work, if the mutations spread any further, there may not be anything left to save. Marcus looked at her, his resolve firm. He knew she was right. Every minute they delayed could result in losing more soldiers, more of humanity's future. But there was a fire in his gut, a belief that they could turn the tide. That belief was all he had left. He turned to Lieutenant Nora Kane and Sergeant Claire Devereaux, who had been with him from the beginning. They had seen their comrades fall, but they still believed in the cause. The time for words was over. "We're going to make our stand," Marcus said, his voice steely. "We'll deploy the cure in the field. It's risky, but it's the only shot we've got. The infected can still be saved, but only if we get this to them before the mutations are irreversible. Reyes will never agree, but we have to push forward." Nora nodded, her face hardened with determination. Claire, usually quick to voice her concerns, said nothing. She simply nodded as well, her eyes locked onto Marcus's. They knew the risks. If the infected were beyond saving, there was only one way to ensure humanity's survival. The team, now more of a shadow of its former self, prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Their destination was a collection of outposts where the infected had been wreaking havoc, where humanity had drawn its last lines of defense. If they could deliver the cure to those soldiers, they might just buy enough time to hold the line against the Xerox. But if they failed, humanity would be left with no choice but to destroy its own. In the ruins of a once bustling military installation, the infected were already on the move. Their bodies were grotesque, twisted by the virus into monstrous forms, and their eyes gleamed with wild, savage intelligence. They were still human, but they had become something far more dangerous. As Marcus's team infiltrated the perimeter, they encountered the first wave of infected soldiers. They moved with inhuman speed, their massive, mutated bodies tearing through the defenses. Their faces, once familiar, were now unrecognizable. But Marcus refused to hesitate. With one swift motion, he reached into his pack and pulled out a portable version of the cure. He administered it to one of the infected, a soldier who had been a part of his team not long ago. The soldier's body spasmed, his muscles contorting in violent seizures. Marcus held his breath, waiting for the cure to work. Seconds passed, but the soldier's violent thrashing slowly began to subside. His eyes, once glazed with madness, began to clear, focusing on Marcus in a moment of recognition. It worked. The soldier, still weak, looked up at Marcus. "You came for me?" he gasped, voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Always," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "You're not lost yet." But there was no time to linger. More infected soldiers were closing in, and the cure's effect was still uncertain. They needed to reach the others, and quickly. As Marcus and his team moved deeper into the heart of the installation, they saw the true scope of the devastation. The infected had already overrun several outposts. Entire squads of soldiers had been lost, and now, those who remained were fighting for their lives, not against the Xerox, but against their own kind. The battle raged on, the sound of gunfire echoing through the ruins. Marcus and his team fought their way through, every step a testament to their unshakable will to survive. And as the first doses of the cure were delivered to the infected, something incredible began to happen. The infected soldiers, those who had been caught at the very edge of madness, started to regain control. But it was too late for some. Marcus and his team were forced to make heartbreaking decisions. Infected soldiers who were too far gone had to be neutralized, while those who could be saved were given a second chance at life. The day after the battle victory came with its own cost. Uneasy dawn. Some soldiers, despite the cure, could not return to the battlefield. Still stained the ground. The war had scarred them in ways that no serum could fix. Survival against the Xerox, the day ended with no clear winner. They had created. The cure had worked for some, but not for all. The cure, though successful, and the infected soldiers, though saved in part, were still struggling to find their place in a world that had turned against them. As Marcus stood amidst the wreckage, looking over the men and women who had once fought beside him, he realized that humanity had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were no longer just fighting the Xerox. They were fighting themselves, their very nature. But the war was not over. It had only just begun. Their bodies and minds had been altered. Some carried scars that no serum could heal, emotional, psychological wounds that would take years to repair. The virus had changed them forever. Marcus Graves stood at the forefront of the makeshift hospital, a grim expression etched on his face. The medics and scientists worked relentlessly, trying to stabilize the remaining soldiers who had been infected. His eyes drifted over the room, past the men and women who had fought beside him, now recovering or in various states of rehabilitation. Some were too far gone, their minds forever warped by the virus. Others, though still struggling, had begun to show signs of recovery. In the corner, Dr. Elena Soren observed the progress of the cure with a mixture of caution and optimism. Her work had saved countless lives, but the stakes had only grown higher. There was still no guarantee that the virus wouldn't mutate further, that the cures they had developed would hold. The solution was never as simple as it seemed. The virus had proved to be far more unpredictable than they had anticipated. The longer it lingered in the human genome, the more possibilities it created. Every soldier saved was a victory, but for how long? The virus is adapting, Dr. Soren said, her voice tense as she sifted through data on her terminal. We've only slowed its progression. But I fear the next mutation will be far worse. Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched in frustration. The constant uncertainty gnawed at him. Time was their enemy now, more so than the Xerox. Every moment they spent repairing the damage done by the virus only gave the alien invaders more room to strike. The war was no longer about winning, it was about surviving long enough to rebuild. Across the room, Lieutenant Nora Kane walked toward him, her face a mixture of weariness and resolve. She had witnessed the transformations firsthand. She had seen friends fall into madness and others pulled back from the edge. The cure had given some of them a second chance at life, but at what cost? How much longer can we keep fighting, Marcus? Nora asked, her voice quiet but filled with the weight of a question that had plagued them all for too long. We've won battles, but the war? It feels endless. And every day, it's more of us, our own people, being consumed. Marcus looked at her, his mind working furiously to calculate their next steps. He had always believed that humanity's greatest strength lay in their ability to adapt, to rise above the odds. But lately, even he had begun to question that. The Xerox are not the only threat, Nora, Marcus said, his eyes scanning the horizon through a small window in the hospital. We've been fighting for so long, against them, against the virus, against each other. But what happens when the war is over? What will we be? Will we even be human anymore? Nora looked at him, understanding in her eyes. That's what scares me too. Meanwhile, the situation at the front lines was growing more dire. The Xerox had regrouped, and though they had been pushed back, they were not yet defeated. The resistance had lost too many of their best soldiers to the virus, and their ranks were thinner than ever. The infected, now part of the fragile army, could not be relied upon fully. They were not the invincible warriors they had once been. Humanity was at a crossroads, and the need for a final decision loomed over them. But in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected occurred. In a small, isolated town on the outskirts of the last human stronghold, a group of soldiers, now beginning to show signs of true recovery, had discovered something strange. A signal, faint but unmistakable, emanating from the heart of the Xerox territory. The Resistance's intelligence had been tracking the Xerox for months, but this new signal was unlike anything they had seen before. It was not a military transmission. It was something else entirely, a broadcast. The message was simple and chilling. We know what you've done. And we're coming for you. Marcus had seen the devastation the Xerox were capable of. He had felt the weight of every loss, every friend, every ally sacrificed in this war. But this message wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. The Xerox had become aware of humanity's adaptation. They had seen the first signs of humanity's evolution into something beyond what they had anticipated. The enhanced soldiers, the mutations, the virus, it had all been part of a larger equation, one that the Xerox were now planning to exploit. The Resistance immediately began to mobilize, sending out reconnaissance teams to investigate the source of the broadcast. But Marcus knew that this was no simple battle. The Xerox had learned, and now they were preparing for humanity's next step. Dr. Soren had confirmed that the virus, despite its unpredictable nature, had unlocked something extraordinary in humanity's genetic code. It wasn't just about the soldiers anymore, it was about all of humanity. The next step of evolution was already taking root. But what that evolution would become was still unclear. "We're standing on the edge of something bigger than we've ever imagined," Marcus said, his voice heavy with the realization. "And we're not the only ones who know it." As the team prepared for their next move, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the final battle was approaching. Not just for Earth, but for what it meant to be human. The war with the Xerox had pushed humanity to the edge, and now it was up to them to define who they were and what they could become. The evolution of humanity was no longer a matter of scientific discovery, it was a matter of survival. The world was on the precipice of something far greater, and far more dangerous, than they had ever imagined. And whether they would stand as the last bastion of human civilization or fall to a new, alien-driven world order was a question that had yet to be answered. The final days of the war had arrived, but they were not the days of victory or defeat Marcus Graves had once imagined. Humanity, on the brink of annihilation, was now on the cusp of an entirely new reality. The reversion virus, which had once ravaged their soldiers and threatened to tear them apart, had become the catalyst for an unprecedented evolution, a transformation that was beyond even their own comprehension. The ultimate question now was no longer about whether humanity could survive the Xerox, it was about what humanity would become. The Xerox, once confident in their dominance, now faced a foe unlike any they had encountered. They had watched as the virus spread and mutated, enhancing the strength, speed, and intellect of human soldiers, but they had underestimated the potential consequences. The mutated soldiers, though once wild and unpredictable, had begun to show signs of adaptive intelligence, evolving at an alarming rate. They were no longer just soldiers, they were evolving into something more, something entirely alien, even to their own creators. The message from the Xerox had been clear, *, we know what you've done. And we're coming for you. *. That message was more than just a threat. It was a recognition. The Xerox had seen that humanity was no longer simply a victim of their invasion, humanity was adapting, changing, becoming something new. In their desperation to defeat the virus, Marcus and his team had unknowingly ignited the next phase of humanity's evolution. And now, as the Xerox prepared for their final strike, humanity would either embrace this evolution or perish. Marcus stood before his assembled team, now a core group of enhanced soldiers and allies who had weathered every trial thrown their way. Lieutenant Nora Kane, Sergeant Claire Devereaux, Dr. Elena Soren, and the few remaining soldiers who had been cured from the virus, they were all that remained of the once mighty resistance. Some of them had become more than human, their bodies and minds reshaped by the virus and the enhancements that followed. Others, still recovering, had become shadows of the warriors they once were, struggling to reconcile their humanity with the monster they had become. "I don't know what the future holds," Marcus said, his voice filled with the weight of the responsibility that pressed on him. "But we're no longer fighting to survive. We're fighting to define who we are, what we stand for, and whether humanity can evolve into something greater than we've ever imagined, or fall into the abyss." The decision was no longer just about winning. It was about survival, not of the body, but of the soul. Would humanity embrace its new potential, its enhanced form, or would it lose itself in the mutation, becoming something monstrous, something unrecognizable? The battle to come was not simply a confrontation between the Xerox and humanity, it was a battle for the very essence of what it meant to be human. The virus had unlocked a primal force within humanity, a force that could either elevate them to new heights or bring them crashing down into darkness. Marcus's team was ready. They had no choice but to be. As the final confrontation with the Xerox approached, they gathered their forces, now a motley array of soldiers, scientists, and civilians who had rallied behind the cause. The enhanced soldiers, those who had embraced the transformation, were ready to fight alongside their human comrades. Their strength had increased, their abilities far surpassing anything they had known before, but with that power came a responsibility. A responsibility to hold on to their humanity, even as the evolution continued to change them. The final battle took place on the barren plains of the last human stronghold, a place that had once been teeming with life but was now a desolate wasteland. The Xeroc arrived in full force, their massive warships blotting out the sky. The air crackled with the tension of impending doom. But as they descended, they found something unexpected: humanity had evolved. Marcus stood in the front, his enhanced body a symbol of the new humanity. His strength, speed, and intelligence had been amplified by the virus, but he still felt the human emotions that had driven him from the beginning. He wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to preserve what made him human. Nora, Claire, and the others were at his side, their once familiar faces now transformed by the virus into something both beautiful and terrifying. They had become the apex of human evolution, the culmination of everything humanity could be. The battle was brutal. The Xeroc, stunned by the sheer power of the humans they had underestimated, fought fiercely, but they were no match for the evolved soldiers. Humanity's enhanced soldiers moved with precision, speed, and intelligence far beyond anything the Xeroc had anticipated. But even as they tore through the Xeroc forces, Marcus knew this was not just a physical fight. It was a spiritual one. The future of humanity, of Earth itself, was being decided in these final moments. Amidst the chaos, Dr. Soren discovered something even more unsettling. The virus, while granting humanity unprecedented power, was also evolving at an accelerating rate. What had been a disease was now transforming into something more, a potential evolutionary leap that could either create a new, unified species or fracture humanity into something unrecognizable. The future was no longer clear. They had opened a door to an unknown future, one that would either lead to a golden age of human potential or to a new, terrifying form of domination. But Marcus refused to give in to doubt. As the last of the Xeroc forces were decimated, he stood tall, looking at his comrades, now his family. They had fought through impossible odds, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. "We've won," Marcus said, his voice ringing with certainty. "But the real fight is just beginning. Humanity has evolved. We are no longer prey to anyone. We are predators now, but we decide what kind of predators we will be." The skies above Earth were silent, the alien ships falling to the ground, broken and defeated. Humanity had survived, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they had changed. They had evolved, and in that evolution, they had become something far greater than the sum of their parts. Now, as the battle smoke cleared and the Earth began to heal, humanity stood on the precipice of a new dawn, a dawn where they would decide their future, and whether they would become the masters of their destiny or be consumed by the very power they had unlocked. But for Marcus and his team, one thing was certain: humanity had evolved. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of an entirely new species, one that would define its place in the universe, not as prey, but as the predator. And the universe would never be the same again.